Hi folks, welcome to another episode of My Life with Robert Burns. Jim Thompson and Douglas McKenzie here again to talk to one of our Burns cronies. Hi Jim.
Hi Douglas, hi everybody.
Tonight our guest is a well-known Scottish borderer. Cronies everywhere. Please welcome Davey Scott.
Hello everybody, I hope you're all keeping well.
Hi Davey, how you doing?
Oh, grand, thanks.
Good. Davey, we always start these sessions in the same way. We always ask the same question. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, please?
Well, I'm a borderer born and bred. My mother came from Roslin. My father was from Musselburgh. He worked for the railway, and he got a posting in Galashiels, that well-known borders town. I can't mind much about it. I just landed at the beginning in 1959, and then by about 1961, when I was about 2.5, we were evacuated out and refugeed to Hoyt. When my father got a promotion, he got a position in Hoyt as the area admin manager for the Waverley line. So my first real recollections were in Mansfield Crescent in Hoyt, which isn't in the West End, so I'm not a gutter blood West Ender. I could never have been the bra lad of Gallat, to be quite honest, because I wasn't there long enough, and I'd never been on a pony by the time that I left. And I could never be the cornet of Hoyt because I wasn't born in Hoyt, and I didn't meet any of the criteria. But I had all my upbringing in Hoyt, and I first went to school at Trinity Primary School, and it was a cracking wee school, and a lot of history. And education in the early 1960s in the borders was super. In fact, it'd probably be super right through the whole of Scotland. You know, a lot of good Scottish entrepreneurs, and every career that was going had a Scotsman. All the inventions were coming out of Scots. I never made any of that, to be fair, because I used to get seasick going across the TV at Brig. Because if you were looking upstream and it was in Spate, that would only take me about 5 minutes to go green, and then I'd have to go home and spend the rest of the morning in the house. But it was great growing up in Hoyt, because you learnt so many things. And one of the things was it's steeped in tradition, isn't it? It's a border town. You're near the borders, and Englandshire was, I want to take something off us, and we were, I want to go and get it back, and things like that. And we learnt about that at an early age, and it kind of developed my interest in history and border history and common writings and things like that. But then tragedy struck, to be fair, because in about 1969, Dr. Beechin, well, he's getting the blame, actually. I mean, and every borderer would probably blame Beechin, because the Waverley line was closed, and it had a terrible effect on the borders. I mean, it was our main means of transport and communication. It takes hours to get to Edinburgh by the bus in the middle of the 1960s. But on the Scots that were biding in Mansfield Crescent, it was devastating, because we had to up and leave. So we had an uncle that lived in Blackburn in West Lothian, and he said, there's a wee flat come up. It would just suit you guys very, very well. And by that time, my father had been offered Glasgow Central or London King's Cross, and he didn't want to go to Glasgow Central, and he certainly didn't want to go to London King's Cross. because that'd have been a massive upheaval for for all us. So off we popped, and with a couple of years up in Blackburn in West Lothian, and I went to Red House Primary School, which is now a block of flats, and the building's still there. And then, my dad had got he got a job as a late entrant with the Bank of Scotland. So lo and behold, he got a transfer to Haddington. So we just sort of gathered our gear together. My mum, my dad, my wee brother Neil, and myself. And we spent the next 30 years in Haddington, in East Lothian, in a cracking place. Nice place, nice town centre, not an awful lot of trouble, great school, and I ended up at the Knox Academy. And I spent 6 years there. I'm not sure what I did in the 6th year right enough, but I had an idea of what I was doing in the first 5 years. And then I had to go and get work. And I got a job. I joined the civil service. It wasn't for me, to be fair. I like to be out and about and meeting people, and I was in an office, and it was the wrong move for me. It was probably the wrong move, me going to the civil service for them, I know. So we parted company as friends. In fact, just at that time, Sir Robert McAlpine had dug the first sod at Torness Point and started building the first nuclear power station in its type at Torness, just down the coastline for Dunbar. So I started with Sir Robert McAlpine. And it was fascinating because it was the first quality assured job that had been of that size, that nature. To the people of the southeast of Scotland, getting a nuclear power station on their doorstep came as something of a surprise, and it was a bit of a worry. But after a couple of years of doing certain things, various different things, there was a meeting in Bernard Street in London, where that was the Sir Robert McAlpine headquarters at the time. And there'd been a wee bit of sabotage at Torness. And there was a lot of protesters chaining themselves to the gates and the fencing and things like that. And then there was a wee mix-up with the PFA and the OPC silos, the pulverised fuel ash and the ordinary Portland cement. So they swapped them over. Whoever it was changed 2 signs, Douglas. Took the one for one and put it on the other, and then vice versa. And there was a right upset and a rammy about that. And they wanted to bolster the quality assurance aspect of the job so that it would never happen again. And as I was told the story by one of the senior engineers at the time, there was a comment made by the chief engineer at Bernard Street in London that any idiot could be a QA engineer. And apparently I fitted the bill perfectly. So I was approached and said, would you like to become a QA engineer? Well, I knew nothing about what it was, but they gave me some terrific training and I became a quality assurance engineer. And what that did is it gave us the most incredible insight into the design, the safety aspects, the diverse workforce that was there. About 5,000 men on the day shift at one time, men and women. And I did a year on the night shift and had to come off the night shift because my young son, well, he'd just been born, so I went back on the day shift. And they were great years at Torness. I did a lot of learning about people and I did a lot of learning about myself, to be perfectly fair. And then I was invited to go down to, Calpine had a job at Sellafield, BNFL at Sellafield, and would I go down and would I do an audit at the Thorpe Head End, or join into the audit at the Thorpe Head End. So away I went, and it was great. And I was looked after and I learnt a lot, and I got great training. But I didn't want to be based in Cumbria. I wanted to be nearer home, you know, with Pam, my missus, and with Michael, who was just a babe. And then Wimpy advertised for a trainee health and safety officer. Well, having had a sort of two interesting events at Torness that were safety related, I thought I'd like to learn a bit more about this safety. One of them, Douglas, was quite interesting because you'll know a Dad's Army, and Corporal Jones shouting, "Don't panic." Well, we had a younger version of Corporal Jones, and the alarms went off outside, and we were confined to barracks. We couldn't go out. We had to get our breathing apparatus on the desk beside us. All doors and windows were shut. And then this door burst open, and there was this guy in his gas mask came running in, roaring, "Don't panic, don't panic." Run through the building and out the door at the other end, and we never seen him again. And well, none of us panicked because we weren't going anywhere. There was nowhere to go. And then I was on the third sea tank project, which is it's a tank that takes liquor for the reprocessing element for the ponds, and they treat it and they store it, and then it went for the third sea tank and it was pumped out to sea. Well, they just built this thing, and with all these kind of things, they fill it with water to see if it's going to move. You know, is it going to topple one way or another? So they wanted somebody to work a ghoster. So I started at 8 o'clock that morning, and I was positioned on top of this sea tank with a deck chair. There was a safety rail around it. There was a trap door, no lid, and they'd filled this thing with water. So I was sitting there, and then of course it got dark, and there was no lights where I was. And I remember just before it got really dark that I looked down into the tank just to see if I could see, was the water level getting any lower? And there was a scaffold about 10 feet down, and tied to this scaffold was a rubber dinghy. So I think that was the safety precautions. And I couldn't swim. I still can't swim, as it happens. So it was safer sitting at the edge of the roof of this tank than it was looking down this hole. And then all of a sudden the Royal Navy appeared, and there was a whole entourage of them. There must have been 7 or 8 vehicles. And I didn't know that across the other side of the chicken wire fence, that must have been the plutonium store or something like that. And they were delivering plutonium that was going to get treated and reprocessed. And there was plenty of lights then, by the way, because I shouted a lot to one of the guys. And when they put all the floodlights round, there was 3 guys pointing rifles at me. And I never told Pam that for years, that because I think if I'd have made another move, I'd have been just shot off the top of that sea tank. But I just took an interest, so I applied for that job with Wimpy, because I thought there must be a bit more to safety than a dinghy tied to a scaffold 10 foot below the surface, of this particular thing. So I joined Wimpy, trained very well, got my qualifications, had 10 years with Wimpy. That got me into house building. And to be quite honest, I must have spent the next 35 years in house building. I moved from Wimpy to, well, what turned into Beezer Homes. And Beezer were taken over by Persimmon. So a lad in Jedburgh that I worked with at Wimpy said, come and give us a couple of years. We need a bit of discipline in our timber frame erection business. The design and the manufacture, the actual frames are absolutely wonderful, but we just needed, you know, a bit of discipline that they didn't have. So I became a contracts manager in timber frame, and I could be in Dundee one day, Bournemouth the next day. I could be in Norfolk the day after that. I had a terrific time. Again, learnt a lot, met a lot of people. And again, another Wimpy colleague gave me a call, and off I trotted to Tibet, which became Avant Homes. Eventually, Avant Homes is still there, going strong, just been bought out again. And I retired for Avant Homes at the end of 2017.
Good for you.
But I found that I'm not very good at retirement yet. I think I just did a wee bit in me. So I've got the most interesting, cracking wee job as a technical officer in the assets team of Berwickshire Housing Association. And I'm just one of the old ones, isn't I? So that, you know, career-wise, enjoyable. I've saw the best of what the construction industry can offer. I've seen the worst as well. You know, when you're in the safety team, and I finished as the group corporate responsibility director, which covered health and safety, and I did all the insurances and stuff like that. I was well looked after, and I like to think I looked after them as best as I possibly could. But I'm working beside a cracking wee team doing here, you know, 1,900 properties, you know, a good number of tenants. And we do our very best to make sure that their properties are up to speed.
Obviously, a career that's developed into a lot of attention to detail. Did that come from schooling at all?
It did. It did. The attention to detail, when you know you're learning as a youngster, and if you're like a wee sponge and you're keen to soak it all in, and there was, you know, I took these kind of things seriously, because my granddad, my papa, as I used to call, used to say, you can be whatever you want to be, but it's not on a plate. You've got to work for it, and you've got to think, and you've got to learn. So I tried to develop an attentive memory. And a lot of the work that I did was involving auditing, investigative works. Very, very sadly, I've been involved in the investigation of a number of fatalities in the construction industry. I'm pleased to say, no consolation to the families of the people that passed away, by the way, but no company I worked with was ever prosecuted for being negligent. We tried our best to teach people, educate people, work with people, get the best out of people. And I did a bit of study for my exams. I had to do a bit of behavioural science, so I had to learn about me first before I could learn about anybody else. So I think you're right, you know. And that's just one of these things, you know. The further up we got in Avant, the more psychometric testing we got. We went through Belbin, we went through, you name it, Hogan. We were analysed to the nth degree, and it's amazing how accurate it was, because when somebody's sitting there saying that's what you are on that bit of paper, and I read it and I thought, that's absolutely right, that. And I'm not saying, oh, it was good, Douglas. There was, there's things, but it's become a way of life, actually. It helped us with my burdens anyway, Well,
before we move on to that, did you do history at school?
No, would you believe? No.
Well, the reason I was asking was that the print behind you looks quite fascinating, which is obviously a historical print. Can you tell us something about it?
I can, aye. And the thing is, I didn't feel I needed to do history after my primary school and at Trinity Primary School, Douglas, because for almost day one, when they're giving you the modern day equivalent in 1964 to the Death and Doctor Hornbook, the actual Hornbook itself was a slate, a bit of chalk and a duster. And so you're doing your ABCs and your 1, 2, 3s and things like that. But quite a lot of our learning was all about border history. And that went right on, and it still does right through the high school in Hoyt, and right across the whole of the borders. But this print at the top is Return for Horns Hall. It's 1514. The precursor to that was obviously the Battle of Flodden, which wasn't at Flodden because it's at Branxton Hill, because they moved for Flodden on the morning of the battle. James IV was the king. And every man in Scotland for the age of 16 to 60 was mustered, initially at the Borough Muir in Edinburgh. Then they came down into the borders, just short of Duns. Then they raided into Northumberland. Some say there was about 60,000 men. Population of Scotland wouldn't be 5 million in 1513. So 60,000 men was a fair percentage of the population. And sadly, they had an unbeatable position on Flodden Hill. But the Earl of Surrey was a wily old character, and he circumnavigated, come round the back of the Scots, and he cut them off with the Tweed and the fords, and he camped at he came round the back at Branxton Kirk and Branxton Hill, and James IV moved, and it's about a mile away. So the battle was on September the 9th, 1513, and the vast majority of the Scottish borders were on the left flank. They did well initially. When other bits of the battle weren't good, the weather was absolutely terrible. The Scots, a lot of them, they were in their sheltons and their squares. It's very steep ground, very boggy, and the English had the weapon of mass destruction at the time was the billhook. The French had talked James IV into supplying every Scotsman with a 16-foot pole that had been sharpened on the end. They got into their squares, they were sliding down the hill. James, to be fair to James the Fourth, he was right in the middle of the fighting, and the story's told that the border boys moved for the left flank to join their king in the middle. And as Alan Bryden's song about Flodden tells us, there was about 10,000 men that day on the Scottish ranks never went home, and that included Hoyk. The story tells that there wasn't a man went back to Hoyk. There was one went back to Selkirk. That well-known story about Fletcher going back to Selkirk with a Macclesfield horse and a captured flag, and he cast the flag, and every Selkirk common riding now, all the trade guilds and the Royal Borough Standard Bearer casts the flag, and they cast it low to indicate that all these men died. So we know older men between 16 and 60, all that was left in Hoyk was the callants. And Dacre was given the task of keeping the borders in check, and he made a decision that he was going to ransack Hoyk. And the local youth found out about this, and they weren't just going to sit in Hoyk and let all these hardened soldiers come in. And it was a detachment of hardened fighting men for Hexham, and they camped at a place called Horns Hole, which is a mile to the west of Hoyk, towards Jedburgh. And the young callants attacked the Hexham contingent, and they defeated them, and they took the flag. And it's a flag that's royal blue with gold running through, as was depicted and still depicted in Hexham down at the old kirk there. And that picture there is what turned out in later years to become the cornet. This was, we believe, young Drumlanrig. And he's got the royal blue flag with a gold saltire on it. Hoyk have added the numbers 15, 14 to that flag. It's sacred. The most recent edition of that flag was presented to the cornet in 2014. And I was there, I was toasting at the 15-14 dinner, I was toasting Hoyk common riding. I stood next to the flag, but I didn't feel that I was in any way had earned the right to touch that flag. But that painting there is the return back into the town, having given Hoyk and the borders and the rest of Scotland some self-respect back. And it rallied the troops, and it got the hair in the back of their neck standing up. And probably ever since then, there's been cornets and common ridings. The first one in writing 1703, but we reckon for the 1500s there'll be some kind of event to keep marauders, interlopers, and that off the grounds. And even Horns Hole today is a sacred place in the borders, and a very, very quiet ceremony where the cornet and his right and his left-hand man will stand up in the stirrups and they'll lower their heads and they'll pay homage to the border men that fell. So, and the rest of the stuff is either Burn stuff or I write a bit of doggerel poetry. You know, it's common riding related or Burns related, because that's my interest in life, other than the family.
That's fantastic, Davey. I mean, it's obvious that your knowledge of the history and heritage of the borders is unsurpassed. And you drifted a wee bit into Burns there. You told us about the Hornbook and such like. So that would be a great opportunity for us to link into talking more about Burns. And I'll get Jim to introduce the discussion on that.
Yeah. Thanks, Douglas.
Davey, as always, this question is the same to everybody. How did you get involved with Burns in the first place?
Well, Jim, I suppose like most of us at the time, you know, the 1960s, that's when my grandfather said that the world was getting a bit of colour and coming out of black and white. And, you know, the telly went off at 10 o'clock, you know, this wee dot appeared on the telly. And there was one thing that I think I missed to be, and certainly in this lockdown I've missed, was the getting together of friends and relatives in each other's houses and the art of self-entertainment. And in Hoyk, not just, you know, with the common riding fraternity, but the real women all were a close-knit fraternity. And they'd often go around, and myself and my brother will be no different for hundreds of thousands of other Scottish boys, that if there was a wee party going on in the house and a sing-song and a bit of self-entertainment. We got to stay up that wee bit later, and we'd sit between the settee and the big chair, but far enough back that nobody really could see us. And I just got enthralled by the singing, the reciting, the storytelling, and there were certainly hoik songs and folk songs and things like that. Yud Lambert was one of my dad's pals, and he worked at the railway and that as well. And he would come up with, he always recited Gunga Din or the Charge of the Light Brigade. And as it happens, any time he was getting into the first 2 or 3 lines of Esco Manel, that apparently was the time that me and my brother had to go to our bed. And even to this day, to be perfectly fair, I've never heard any more than 2 lines of Esco Manel, because I seem to be getting up and putting myself to bed when that But there was, I had an uncle. Well, he wasn't really my uncle. He was one of my dad's best pals, and he was called Jimmy McBain, and he was an inspector on the railways in the border, based out in Newcastle. And he was a Burns enthusiast. And you mind Dad's Army and the boy that played Fraser, the Undertaker, played by John Laurie. Classically trained actor, but very sort of sharp, distinguished features. Well, my Uncle Jimmy McBain looked like that. And see when he did Holy Willie with a light suit and the wee candle flickering. And it's like Fraser, he had one eye open, and it didn't matter where in the room you were, that eye was staring at you. And he would recite Holy Willie and to a mouse and whatever. And he would tell stories about Burns, and we were getting wee immortal memories. We were getting taught in Burns, but we didn't know we were getting taught at the time. But it was right interesting. And our teacher, Miss Grieve at the school, once she'd exhausted, getting us to sing the Border Queen and Up with Old Hoik and things like that, it must have been the early stages. Archie MacArthur would tell us, but we all got put into a competition, but we didn't have to recite Burns at the time. When we started, it was all about, I did the Sair Finger, I think it was, and I got a 3rd prize, and I wouldn't have called the King my uncle. I think it was a Mars bar and a pencil I got as a prize. But I just loved the fact that folk were happy when there was singing going on or reciting going on. And I latched onto that. And it's never really stopped until March last year, when lockdowns, and in fact the last Burn Supper that was about 4 days before the first lockdown, and we all got, well, I never got furloughed, but so many people got furloughed. But that's where it started. So it was in the home, and it was in the school, and it did us no harm, and I thoroughly enjoyed it, and it set me up.
But I mean, you're involved obviously in the borders, and you're further involved in the Burns clubs. What's your history in the Burns clubs? Well,
this Uncle Jimmy McBain said that he said I had a reasonable voice for speaking, and I should never be allowed to sing. And see, to be quite honest, to the peril of about 99% of the folk that I know, I've tried to prove them wrong for about the last 50 years. And nobody's taken his own way, to be honest. But he spoke a lot. He did a lot of readings, as he called them. And he did not so many toasts to the lasses. His immortal memory was a bit dry, but he said, I'll teach you the rudiments of speaking. So for quite a young age, I did a bit of speaking, because just what we're all saying now, we could do with some younger folk, even in the mid to late 70s, the Jim Bushes of this world for the Arts Club and Preston Pans and whatever was saying, it's about time some of you young fellas got up on your back legs and did a bit of speaking. So I started doing a wee bit of speaking and reciting and things like that. And just with getting about and meeting people and making the friends and whatever, I joined Burns Club. I didn't join the Burns Club in Haddington. I was working that hard, so I was quite late into it. But I'm a member of Duns, the Whittaker and Churnside. Well, if I've paid last year's money, I might still be a member. If no, I'll see if I can double it up this year and get back in. I'm a member of Coldstream. I'm an honorary life member of Hoyk. And when you do and you'll know this yourselves if you're invited, the great honour to do the immortal memory at other clubs, the accolade you give you is to be able to say, I'm an honorary member here. And Dumfries Burns Club have asked me to do that. And the boys in the Globe, Dumfries House Burns Club have asked me to do the immortal memory, and I became an honorary member. And for a wee while, I was involved with the World Federation. And through my work, not my money, but I spoke to our chief exec. I was a director, and I said to him, look, our corporate responsibility is to put a wee bring back into, the people. And I said, there's this thing called the Annual Schools Festival. So we approached the Robert Burns World Federation. And I was a member at the time. And we asked if we could sponsor. So we sponsored the Schools Festival for, I think it was 4 years. And then and Bob Dial, well-known Burnsy and past president, had made such a great job at the choirs competitions. And when they retired for that, I did it for a year. And all that was great fun. But there's a huge Burns network alive and kicking down here in the Borders. And I'm not convinced that everybody knows that further afield. And maybe we just keep ourselves to ourselves that wee bit too much. It's great for me getting invited all over the place, but we have some fantastic Burnsians down here. Knowledgeable men and women, great singers, great reciters, and a couple of great events every year. Coldstream has the bridge ceremony, when Burns and Ainsley in 1787, they say that, I think it was the Monday, came down on the Friday, the Saturday, went to church in Duns on the Sunday, then crossed down to England over the glorious River Tweed on the Monday. So every year, the Coldstream Burn Clubs hosts the bridge ceremony. And there's a lot of people come to that. And the nearest Burns ever got would be about the second week in July, when he was on his border tour. The nearest he got to Hoyk was a big house called Wauchope, which is stuck in the hills, almost halfway between Jedburgh, where he was lodging, and obviously Hoyk, but he never made it into Hoyk ever. That must have been common riding week at the time, because the men would have all been out and riding about the countryside. But there's a ceremony to this day at Wauchope, and it's the second Sunday in July. So quite a lot to you know. The difficulty I find, and I feel a wee bit guilty, is that, say, Duns has their Burns Club traditionally on exactly the same day or night as Hoyk has their Burns Club, their Burns supper. And you can't be two places at the one time. And for these last several years, I get invited a lot of places. So it's sad to say that I sometimes miss my own Burns Club's nights, because if you're booked up 3 and 4 years in advance and things like that, you can miss out on a good night at home. But you make new friends when you go somewhere else, don't you?
Well, David, boy, you've confessed to being a writer of poetry, doggerel or not, so we're going to give you the opportunity to show the world.
Oh, thanks very much, Jim. And can I just plead guilty? It really is doggerel poetry. but everybody has, you know, well, hopefully everybody has good friends. Well, we lost one. The year before I was picked as the chief guest at Hoyt Common Riding, we lost Big Ronnie Nicol. And he was an inspirational big guy. And he was a big guy like me, you know, he was a man, the fuller figure. But he was a rugby player. He was common riding stalwart. He was Hoyt through and through. He was the most, I don't know if he was a church-going man, but he was the most Christian man I've ever met. He'd help anybody. So it hit the community and it hit myself quite hard. But and just to put some context in this, to able to survive a Hoyt common riding, you have to anaesthetise your stomach. And the means by doing that is we drink rum and milk for, well, 9 weeks actually, because it's for the first Friday after the first Monday in June, right through to Coldstream finishes in August. That's common riding season in the Borders. But this is just this guy that made such a mark on me and thousands of others white men. It was about Ronnie Nicol. He signed his cell, your muckle friend, in the cards he sent to me. And when he walked into a room, a friend is what I'd say. He stretched it out yon muckle paw, and I would do the same. And we met like Borders brothers, and I kent that I was hame. We'd join the throng and sing Hoyt songs. The boys regaled their old Hoyt tales, and pride were near let loose a tear. Then milk it rum for breakfast. As the spirit by the oak trees, will we see your friend again? As they sit and blithering wi' old pals and watching what we're doing. When comes the common riding, and in every note that's blown, when the cornet band awaits the tune, when the dark gies way to dawn, we'll hear him croon our favourite tune, and in some place we'll see his face. When he's flitting past, we'll raise a glass as we sip our milky breakfast. Oh,
excellent.
No, really, but it's heartfelt. It's heartfelt, and that's
he sounds like a real character.
He was a great man. He was chairman of the Common Riding. He was a bricklayer. He worked for a Berwickshire. He was known throughout the Borders. He played Scotland B rugby, prop for it. He was at his best when he played Gala Shields every time. He hated to be baked. The rivalry is tremendous, but friendly rivalry. But he was the leader of the Cornets band, you know, the drums and fifes. He gave every part of his soul, either to his family or to his town. And it was it's been an absolute honour and a privilege to know that particular man, and he's sorely missed.
Yeah.
Sorely missed.
Yeah. Davey, you've given us some of your own poetry. What about Burns? Is there a verse of Burns that you could give us just to finish off this episode for us?
Well, I would love to just mention one, and very short it is as well, but it's no a war song. It's no anything that you might associate with us rough house murderers. But I think it's one of the nicest verses that Burns ever wrote. And when my mother sadly passed, my father asked would I pick just a short few words, just that we could say at the end of our eulogy. And I think it's some of the nicest words that Burns ever wrote. And it's the third verse of Were I on Parnassus Hill. And it's, by night, by day, I feel the tame, the thought of thee, my breast in flames, and I am muse and sing thy name. I only live to love thee. Though I were doomed to wander on beyond the sea, beyond the sun, till my last weary sands have run. Till then, and then, I'll love thee. Thank you.
Beautiful verse.
Poignant for us newcomer boys, I've got to say.
Well, thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk to you guys. It's been my pleasure. Nice to see you. No seen you, Jim, for a wee while now. You're looking well, by the way. And Douglas, it's been great to meet you, and I hope we're able to meet and shake hands and greet ourselves like Scottish brothers sometime very.
I look forward to that. And I was interested in your comment about the Burns, the Burnsians and the Borders, and some real characters. And you're right. You're probably only the second person from the Borders that we've spoken to on this series. Ian Buick being the first. And Ian's told us often about the Coldstream event and such like, because he used to come through to the Lepreight competition at Muirkirk. But we also know one of the other characters you mentioned, Archie MacArthur.
Yes, I sadly missed as well. And
he was one of the first people that newcomer at Burns Club trip recce committee ever met. We've been doing outings for 30 years, and our first Borders outing, we managed to contact Burnsian Archie MacArthur, who met us in Kelso and gave us some great advice on places to go and things to see. I've still got some of his notes that he gave us from, and that first meeting must have been 30 years ago.
Oh, a great man. He used to give lectures every month in Hoyt Burns Club. Honorary member of Hoyt Burns Club. His pamphlet, his wee booklet on the Burns Border Tour stands up to comparison with any other historian, Burns historian. He's brilliant, and he did a fair bit just researching on James A. Thompson, that wrote the Starry Rabbie Burns, of course, the first president of Hoyt Burns Club. And Archie was very much involved in all things in the Borders. Archie, that dragged me along kicking and screaming to the education department in St. Boswell's, and because the director of education was an ex-flatmate of mine, and together, and Archie did most of the talking. We got our very first schools competition up and running, and I think that would be about 2003. We'd never participated before. and you know, and that a lot of that's down to Archie. And again, he's like, we could do with one or two characters and people with knowledge of Burns and life, like Archie MacArthur. And just on the Jamesy Thompson, you know, think that a wee bit of the credit has to go to the boy that wrote the tune. Because see if we'd have come out with a dirge or something like that, take the words of James Thompson, you know, for the Starry Robbie Burns, and it was a boy called James Booth that put the music to it, and it got his first public airing at the very first Hoyt Burns Club supper in 1879, and it was sung by a boy called Thomas Strathern. And that combination, the words, the music, somebody singing it, and here all these years later, and for another couple of 100 years, it will be a Hoyt tune that ends most of the Burns suppers just before you go into Auld Lang Syne. Can't be beat.
And that's a great story to tell us just before the end of this episode of My Life with Robert Burns. Thanks very much for spending time with us.
Thank you very much, gentlemen, for having us, and hope we meet soon. Take care. Take care.